Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's event. My name is Lisa Garcia, and I'm here to provide technical support to our team that will be joining us shortly. I can see people are just still getting into the room, so to speak, here in our virtual auditorium. I'm going to encourage you to go ahead and find the chat box, the chat window, and go ahead and share a message for everybody that's signing in tonight and say hello. You can say where you're logging in from, what's brought you here tonight, those kinds of things. And we're going to get started here just a few minutes after the hour, but we appreciate everybody being here tonight. We're expecting a record number of guests. We have over 270 people registered for this event. It's the 9th year for the Combating Racial Injustice event. And we're glad that we were able to bring this to you this year. Last year, unfortunately, the pandemic meant we could not meet in person, so we were unable to hold the event as planned. This year, of course, we've gone virtual, which means we get to have a record number of people participating. So we're so glad you're here. We're up to about 120 people so far in our event. Oh, we've got somebody saying hello from Chicago. Fantastic. All right, so again, my name is Lisa Garcia, and I'm here to just basically give you an orientation about how to participate in tonight's event. We've got some amazing panelists here with decades and decades of wisdom about the topics we're going to be discussing, and we're so excited to have them. But we're also glad to have you here as well, and we want you to participate in a couple of different ways. Because this is a webinar, and because we care about security in particular.
Should I go? Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Combating Racial Injustice webinar. The subtitle is Limiting Police Union Contracts. I'm Wornie Reed, and I'm the organizer of tonight's event. And I'm here with our moderator, Victoria Cochran, who you might see on the screen. And you've just heard from our technical support person, Lisa Garcia. For who I am, I'm a professor of sociology and Africana studies, and I direct the Race and Social Policy Research Center at Virginia Tech University. So I want to thank each of you for registering to attend this vital and very timely webinar. Now, our purpose here today is to alert you to the seriously problematic nature of police union contracts, and also to present to you how Virginia might avoid falling into the trap where hundreds of jurisdictions across the country have found themselves. Often these police union contracts limit the accountability of police officers who have been accused of police brutality. It even limits accountability for murder, as many of you have seen over the last year or two. The reason for this is nothing that's happening in Southwest Virginia where we're emanating from, but this is a national problem, and we're trying to keep that national problem from spreading into Virginia. Last April, Virginia repealed its 1993 ban on collective bargaining for public employees. Starting in this coming May, localities will be able to allow their public agencies and public employees to unionize. Now, I want to be very clear up front. We all support collective bargaining, but we are concerned that unless limitations are placed on this unionization, the collective bargaining issues in police union contracts in Virginia may be expanded beyond working conditions like compensation, benefits, and so on. And they may begin to resemble the contracts across the country. Across the country, police union contracts restrict our ability to hold police officers accountable. And we were going to address these issues today. Before well, we've had Lisa Garcia to talk to you about how to go about participating in this webinar. So we're going to skip the introduction I was going to provide to her here. And I'm going to move right on to our moderator, Victoria Cochran, who recently retired from her position as Virginia Deputy Secretary for Public Safety. She also served 18 years as a public defender and has been substantially engaged in planning for this webinar. She will lead us through the rest of the webinar, and I will turn it over to her now.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Reed. So I'm very excited to be here with you tonight. We'll be spending the next hour or so hearing from our several distinguished panelists about their insights and experiences and concerns regarding police union contracts, what they are, why they matter, and what can be done in combating racism in law enforcement. Our aim is to bring a range of perspectives to bear on this issue of critical importance to better equip citizens of the Commonwealth to take action when it's needed. There are a range of actions to be taken, and Dr. Reed will be laying those out in detail at the end of the program. A reminder, if you have questions for our panelists, please feel free to use the question and answer window to submit them. They'll be forwarded to me, and to the extent that we have time, we'll answer as many questions as we possibly can. Our team of volunteers, and I thank them both very much, Anna and Margaret, are going to be keeping track of that. And if we run out of time, we will make sure that your questions are forwarded to the panelists and we get you some answers if we can, okay? So our first guest, and I'm going to invite him to join us on the panel, is DeRay McKesson. And if we could have DeRay join us on the screen.
I'm here. I don't know why
Hey, there you are. DeRay, it's great to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We so appreciate you. For those of you who may not be familiar with DeRay McKesson, he is a leading voice in the Black Lives Matter movement. He is a co-founder of Campaign Zero, an organization that I have been doing a lot of research into and that many of you may have read about in the news. They're an extraordinary organization, and actually, DeRay, if you're ready, my first question is about Campaign Zero for you. Can you tell us a little bit, for the folks who aren't familiar, what Campaign Zero is and about its origin and its mission?
Yeah, so Campaign Zero, we are called Campaign Zero because we believe we can live in a world without the violence of the police. We believe we can live in a world where we don't think about the police as key to public safety. And, you know, after the protests in Ferguson, we got together and we were in the street in Ferguson and we were trying to figure out, what do we do? What are the solutions? How do we do this? And that led us to think about putting together a group of people that were focused on solutions. One of the things that we thought was going to be a big deal, but we had no proof, was police unions. So we were like, we think something's up with police unions. So we did a big search. We did FOIAs. We did a lot of research to try and figure out how to even get the contracts in the first place. And then we got them and we were like, wow, these are even more problematic than we had imagined in the beginning.
Wow, that's great. And now I really want to focus us on police union contracts, which have become a significant issue now in Virginia, although they have been in many other jurisdictions across the country. But with our recently passed legislation allowing public employees to start collective bargaining, that's a big change. So can you tell us about how Campaign Zero began to focus on this issue and who was involved in the research that you've done, which has been tremendous and of great breadth and depth?
Yeah, so here's the thing is that, so I used to be the chief human capital in the school system in Baltimore. And before that, I'd worked in human capital and senior roles throughout the country. And I knew teachers' contracts really well. I had done a lot of work with teachers' contracts. I had to implement them. I had to read them. I knew labor contracts in general, but in education. So like the paras union and the teachers and the principals and bus drivers. Like I knew that part of labor law really well, and I knew the contracts well. And, you know, we were thinking about the police, and I was like, well, I know some stuff that's hidden in teachers' contracts, and nothing that I saw in teachers' contracts was particularly like bad. There was annoying stuff. It was like, why do we negotiate where the lesson plan goes in the classroom? That's just like annoying to deal with grievances. But there was nothing that was like terrible. But I was like, you know, there's a lot of hidden minutia in here about why we do certain things. And there might be something like this in police unions. Like that was my hunch. So we didn't know. We had no clue. And we partnered with Muck Rock, which is a great organization that does FOIAs. And we were like, well, let's just get them. Let's find the contracts, look at what's in them and see if there's anything there. And that's what we did. We started this in 2015. We started with the 100 largest cities. In 80 of the 100 largest cities, we found that there were problematic clauses in the contracts, and that's what birthed this project. And over the years, we collected 700. So if you go to nixon6.org, there are 700 contracts there today. And that's like how we started this. And you know, we now have over 300 volunteers who every day help us find more and more contracts so we can code them. We're trying to get up to 13,000. We believe that there are about 13,000 contracts. So we're trying to get them all. And, you know, we're always open for more volunteers to help us, but that's how we did it.
Wow, that's great. And I neglected to say right before we started our conversation, because I was so excited to get us going and hear what you had to say, that I know you have to leave us at 7:30. And so I just wanted to warn our attendees that. And so at about 7:25, maybe a little bit earlier than that, I'm going to ask you some questions from our audience. Okay.
Cool.
So what were your findings about the impact of police unions and union contract on citizens and communities?
Well, we found screen sharing was this. If somebody can enable screen sharing for me, I'll show you. But what we found were that there were these 6 clauses. There were these 6 buckets of clauses that generally limited accountability and oversight. So there were a set of clauses that erased misconduct records. So they would just straight up destroy the record. So there are a lot of places. So you think about a Baton Rouge just destroys them after a couple of years for everything. Sustained, unsustained. There are state laws that do this. Like that's not good. So that was one. Then there are a set of restrictions on interrogation. So there are all these rules and policies that make it impossible to interrogate officers. Another one is that they give officers unfair access to information. So they will give an officer the whole investigation file or all this stuff that we never give to somebody else. There are a set of clauses that disqualify complaints. So it's like, if you don't file it, this is actually how I know Chaz is here too. This is how we know Chaz is Suki, his partner, is that, you know, if somebody doesn't file a complaint in time, then they automatically, the complaint gets dismissed. There are a set of clauses that are about pay that essentially like force the department to pay police officers in ways that don't make sense. And then there's just a general bucket of things that limit oversight and discipline. So you think about places like Albuquerque that say an officer can have a lie detector test on them, but only if the person who files a complaint has a lie detector test done on them first. And it's those sort of things that like don't make sense. Or Dallas has a clause that says that officers, if they get disciplined, they lose their salary increase for the next year. If they don't get disciplined during that year where they lost a salary increase, then they get that salary increase back the next year. You're like, well, that's not really a consequence. So it's those sort of things that we're looking for.
Wow, that's amazing that those are the kinds of things that get contracted for. I guess typically when you were dealing with teachers' contracts, it's sort of about pay and hours and working conditions, not about these kinds of issues that impact citizens. By making it easier for police to do wrong and not receive the consequences for it. Is that true?
Yeah, so a lot of working conditions, and with teachers, it's stuff that like generally you would be annoyed by as management, but it's not like dangerous. So like teachers would negotiate like a really weird amount of minutes. So it'd be like the break, this, like every teacher gets 33 and a half minutes. And you're like, why did somebody choose 33 and a half? Like making a schedule around 33 and a half minutes is a nightmare. Do you know what I mean? So It's those sort of things, which like, it's not hurting anybody. It's just like it's almost impossible to implement really well because it's such a weird amount of time. So those are the things in teachers' contracts. But so we didn't know what we'd find in police officer contracts. And then we looked and we were like, whoa, this is unlike any other union we've ever seen.
Wow. So can you give us some specific examples of how a police union contract prevents accountability for police brutality and misconduct, some specific incidences, perhaps, where this has come to light in real life situations.
Yeah, so one that is probably the most known nationally, whether you know it's the contract or not, is Breonna Taylor. So when Breonna Taylor was killed, you might remember that there was one officer who was fired, and then the other officers got put on pay with suspension with pay. They weren't able to be suspended without pay. And everybody was like, well, why couldn't they be suspended without pay? It actually is a union issue. In the contract in Louisville, it literally reads, like the way it reads is that to suspend somebody without pay, you essentially have to have irrefutable proof that they did it. Like it can't be an investigation. Like the bar that they make is so high, and it was written like this very smartly for the police, so that like it's just it's an impossible burden to meet to discipline somebody. Like you would even for things like assault or like using racial slurs, I mean, you'd have to essentially have it on HD quality footage to be suspended with pay. And there's like an addendum to the contract that makes it impossible. So like that's probably the version that the example that people know. But there's a case in California. In California, the Officer Bill of Rights, the state law, which Virginia has a state law around officers. The Bill of Rights says that an officer can't be disciplined if the investigation lasts more than a year. And you're like, well, that doesn't make sense, right? Like that is a weird way to do this. There are places like Maryland where the state law currently says that you cannot file an anonymous complaint for brutality. Like you just can't, you straight up cannot file an anonymous complaint.
Wow.
And so like that has a chilling effect on people. So there are a host of ways, and the record deletion is a big one, is that, you know, we can't even do good modeling of the data if it gets destroyed.
So if a police officer's records for misconduct can be shredded or taken out of their jacket, then I guess that makes it really easy for an officer to go get a job in another police department, even if they don't want him in the police department where he had the misconduct.
Yeah, and that's the obvious thing. What it also means, if you think about it, if you destroy things every 2 years, say you beat somebody up in 3 years, then it looks like you've never done anything. We don't even know. Like there's no record of it. It doesn't come up in future discipline. Like it just doesn't, it's like it never happened. And that is wild. Police officers have too much power for that.
So are there states, I mean, apparently police union contracts are wildly prevalent all over the United States. And are there states or cities or jurisdictions that have good model police contracts that we in Virginia should maybe look to, where they're doing a better job?
So there are 21 states that have Officer Bill of Rights. So, you know, if you go to nixta6.org, you can see if your state is one of them, and you can see which clauses are bad. There are a lot of states that don't, but here's the thing. A lot of the places that don't have bad contracts, so we think about places like Denver, Boston, and there's another place. Denver, there's a third, in Atlanta. Denver, Boston, and Atlanta are 3 cities where the contracts are fine.
Mm-hmm.
But all of the things that we track in contracts, they just have in city policy. So like the bad is somewhere. It's not like the policy. It's not in the contract. It's just in city policy, which ostensibly is easier to change. The mayor normally has like unilateral power to change those policies. They just have not. So there are not a lot of cities where there's just like no bad rules or contracts. We're trying to get out of the contract because it's such a nightmare to change. And in places where there isn't a bad contract, we're trying to get it out of the city policy. But there aren't a lot of great models out there where like it works, it's amazing, the contract's good, the policy's good. Like this is sort of a pervasive problem. And you know, the police unions have been working on this for decades, right? This didn't like happen randomly. They had a strategy to make sure this happened.
Right. That makes sense. Well, I'm going to start looking through our chat just real quick and see what some of our questions are. So here's an interesting question. Do states, I had it there a second ago. There we go. People are asking so many questions. Do states have an umbrella approval of any and all contracts, or is it just the jurisdiction where the police department is located?
It's the jurisdiction. So state law sort of precedes the contract. So if the state law says, for instance, one of the things that we want the state law in Maryland to say is that you can't destroy officer records. So if that happens, if you put that state law in, then the contract can't like negotiate some expungement. Like it can't happen.
Right.
It's great, right? So those sort of things are really interesting and really important. But this is all really local. And I saw somebody else ask, are police contracts public record? So one of the foundational principles of the labor movement was that there are no secrets. So all labor contracts are supposed to be public. The police unions are interesting because they won't make it public. So you'll have to find it through the city. Whereas like most, the teachers union websites have the contract, everybody else does, but like the police don't always make theirs public. You might have to email somebody or find it through the city labor website or something like that.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So another question that's been posed by our panelists, have there been any efforts to document the underlying justifications for some of the really bad, abhorrent policies here to understand what issues need to be addressed from the police perspectives? Like, what is it they're trying to protect themselves from?
So it's interesting. They will say, so when we say don't delete misconduct records, they say 2 years is enough and it shouldn't be held against us. We change, right? Mm-hmm. And we're like, we should know if you beat somebody up and got suspended for it. And we should there should be a record of that, that the power you have in community is so great that we should always know. Whether we do something with it or not is irrelevant, but we should know. Mm-hmm. The police will say, sometimes they don't have great arguments. Really, the police consistent argument is this idea that if you don't give them all these extra protections, then community will be unsafe. They sort of draw that straight line, which is sort of, I don't know where that comes from, but that's what they say. So one of the things that happens across the country is that officers cannot be interrogated immediately. So they will have things like, an officer needs a 72-hour waiting period before they can be interrogated, or a 10-day waiting period, stuff like that. And that comes from this guy who literally said decades ago, he said that officers' jobs are really hard. So they need at least 2 sleep cycles so that the adrenaline can drain from their system and their memory can be at its best. That's like a bizarre, where'd that come from? That's not real.
Wow.
It's debunked by so many people. But this idea of an officer getting a waiting period before they are asked any questions about killing people, that comes from junk science. It's not even science. So there aren't many rationales where you're like, wow, I get it, that doesn't make sense.
So a couple of questions about law enforcement officers being paid while they're not working. Is there, and I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of trouble with my chat here. It's not being nice to me. I'm missing that question, so I'm going to go to another one. Is there anything being done by police departments now to change or alter these contracts? I mean, do law enforcement leadership and the rank and file see some of these problems themselves, and are they trying to make changes internally in any of the work that you're seeing?
Yeah, so the police chiefs sort of agree with us on this stuff, right? Because most of the contracts are make their life really hard too. But the union people have not been they've been probably, in the whole conversation about policing, the union people have probably been the worst, the least willing to change, the least willing to move. And it's been really hard. They are sort of you're trying to solve for a problem that doesn't exist. And we're like, no, these are problems. So they have not been good parties. Sometimes the police chiefs actually are fine.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting. I do know we've got some great law enforcement representation on this call, and I think it's important to be able to have these different perspectives and figure out what the conversation really needs to be. Another question was about insurance. Taxpayers seem to end up paying the burden for these law enforcement officers that are still working while they're under investigation, or if there's a payout because someone was injured. Can insurance cover that kind of cost instead of taxpayers having to pay it?
So the research on this is mixed. Some people think insurance really is a thing. Some people think that it actually might it might take the officers off the hook, and it might limit the settlements that people in communities deserve for the pay that they get. So it's not one of the things that we track, and we don't lead, and we're not leading a campaign around insurance for police officers. I know it's something that people talk about. It's just not one of the things that we really organize around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's next for Campaign Zero on Nix the Six and the work that you're doing around police contract reform? I know we're going to be talking with Chaz Moore here in a couple of minutes about what he's done in Austin. but are you guys working with organizations like Chaz Moore's organization or reaching out to other organizations to assist with this? What's next for Campaign Zero on this issue?
We love jazz. Yeah. So, we worked with jazz a long time ago. So Austin, Chaz Suki, and the rest of the leaders there, they worked really hard to get the police union contract voted against a couple of years ago. And we helped them lead that fight, and they were amazing and they were great. So we love Chaz and Suki. We actually have a standing meeting with them every single Thursday where we come together, the whole team comes together, and we plan around police union work. So it's great. So we work with a lot of people working in a host of cities and states right now around police unions, and it's good to go. So, if you know some places that want to work, we're also trying to build a methodology so we can figure out where we should be working next. So looking at cities where the contract's about to expire and they have a lot of bad contracts or they have a lot of bad clauses and they kill a lot of people, like we're trying to figure out strategically where should we go next.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, we sort of are in places where they're already, like you are already organized. And you reached out like we want to work together. So like that is the majority of what we do right now. We are not going to places saying, have you thought about organizing around this?
Okay, that's great. But the work that you've done, the organization Campaign Zero, the website, by the way, which is campaignzero.org, and we'll be
join campaignzero.org.
Join campaignzero.org, and I highly recommend that to everybody on this call. Great information there, and I hope you'll go to your website and check that out. I just have to say, DeRay, it has been such a pleasure to talk with you. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know everybody on our panel appreciates the hard work and effort that you're doing and the data-driven nature of it. The fact that you're going out and you're looking to see what's really out there, what is the truth, and that's greatly appreciated. So thank you so much for being with us, and I know you've got other calls to get on and other places to be, so we'll let you go for now.
Cool, talk to you later.
Okay, thanks a lot. All right, so that was just terrific, and so glad to hear from DeRay, and that organization is doing wonderful work. Shout out to Dr. Reed too for pulling all this together for us and getting our great speakers, including, as I see on my screen, our next panelist, Chaz Moore from the Austin Coalition for Justice. And welcome, thank you for being here. And that, by the way, I'm going to give you that website as well if anybody's interested, and somebody will put it in the chat for us. It's austinjustice.org. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
So the Austin Justice Coalition's overall goal for Austin is to improve the quality of life for people who are Black, brown, and poor. How did the issue of police union contracting develop as a priority for your group, given everything that you're trying to do for Austin?
Yeah, so I think, and I really think DeRay and Campaign Zero and Sam are doing some really good work. So just want to let people know that definitely support them and follow them. But for us, as we were a young organization, we got started in 2015. And we had shootings of David Joseph and Larry Jackson. And as we are screaming and fighting for police accountability, we were trying to figure out why these things were so hard to come across. So after talking to people that have been doing police work for 20, 30 years, after coming across Campaign Zero and the police union contract project that they have, we saw that the reason people are not getting justice and bad cops are not being held accountable is because of certain loopholes within police union contracts. So immediately we took kind of a pivot to the less sexy work, which is, like the protests and the rallies are those are the things people get excited about, right? But the wonky stuff, like reading 80 to 100 pages of contract to make sure there's no faulty language in it, like that's not really sexy work, but it needed to be done. And thanks to the work of the again, Campaign Zero and DeRay, who kind of like sped it along, we were able to see that Austin had one of the absolute worst police contracts in the country. So
Wow.
Yeah, it was just really important to know why things like accountability were so hard to obtain.
So you've really brought together a wide coalition of stakeholders. How did you do that? Who are your stakeholders in the Austin Coalition, and how did you address your concerns with city leaders? What's your plan been, and how did it come together?
Well, I think the plan has always been to get people to understand that we're living in a different time. These institutions that we have relied upon heavily um, are 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 unfair and unjust, and we have to, with a critical lens, critique these things and make them as best we can, and create alternatives to the system because this system can't do everything. And the stakeholders are a little bit of everybody. First and foremost, it's people that are directly impacted by bad policing, people that have been either through the criminal legal system or people that have lost family members or been, physically assaulted by bad police officers. It's also, the people in the community that say they care about Black Lives Matter and they care about justice and equity. And I don't know what the secret sauce is, outside of the fact that we just try to make this a nonpartisan, just, these are the facts. Let's just pay attention to the facts. Like, this is not a political issue, or it shouldn't. I mean, it is, but it shouldn't be. It's more of a humanitarian issue, right? If you care about the betterment and well-being of everybody, then we have to have a serious conversation about what this institution is and how it operates. And when it comes to, the city officials, Austin is, we get deemed the blue dot in the red bowl of soup here in Texas, and we are that, for the most part. So it's not that difficult to talk to city leadership about, these things, but it's the same approach when we talk to community, right? Like, we let these people know that although you have been elected to represent us, you are also part of this community, and you have a duty and a privilege to steer this community forward, as we have these difficult conversations and make difficult decisions around policing and public safety.
So thank you so much for that really good answer. I'm interested, when these issues come up, it seems like everybody's concerns might be slightly different. Everybody's priority for what a police union contract should look like might be different. How do you address those different alignments of priority and pushback?
Well, I think the main obstacle that we came across when we were first going up against the police union here was, the narrative that we were against unions, right? And I think we quickly had to kind of let people know that, police unions, they really hide behind that phrase union because they're everything but that, right? For the people that know about the history of unions, the cops were not on the side of people fighting for unionizing, right? The cops were very much in the status quo that were breaking up and beating people for fighting for their right to unionize. So, first we wanted to make sure that for the local labor groups and the union groups, let them know, like, we're all for collective bargaining. Like, we're not here to talk about the police and the men and women that wear the uniform rights to bargain for what they think is fair pay and things that can make their job better. However, we have to talk about some of these really weird, wonky rules that they have in their contract. One of which, in Texas, if something happens to you, and it can be very traumatic, you have a 180-day window to report this, right? And we have a case like that here where it was Breonna King, 100-pound year old Black teacher here that was literally slammed to the ground by this huge male officer and then towed in the car as she was being transported to jail for resisting arrest. That Black people are 99% of the reason why cops treat them in a way, because we're just apparently born as scary people. This incident did not get up to the chief's level. It got up to this board that reviews force. This board that reviewed this incident said, not that big of a deal, so we'll just slid to the left, and it never got up to the chief. The chief found out about this a year later, and because of this rule we have in the police union contract, it was nothing he could do. The cop couldn't be fired, they couldn't be reprimanded or anything at all. There are other rules in the police union contract to where if an officer was only disciplined by a written reprimand of 3 days or less, it would just automatically disappear after some time. As opposed to if you or I did something, especially depending on how egregious it was, it would follow you for life. So it's just like, it's things like that we have to let real labor unions know that we're not against unions at all. We're very much pro-worker, we're pro-union. And so, I think that was the biggest obstacle, and we had to have those conversations and control that narrative very on out, because we know historically and strategically that police try to hide behind this pseudo work labor organizing that they are very much not.
Okay. So were you in Austin able to change the police union contract? And what did you come away with that made positive changes, or what are you still working on to make positive changes in Austin with your law enforcement union?
Yeah, so actually, and I say this gleefully, but also like very sadly, that Austin is one of the few places where people have organized around the police union contract, and have just really had major gains. We went in with a goal of 8 what we considered common sense things, and we came out with about 6.5, 7 of these things that we wanted. And that doesn't happen enough. It doesn't happen often. There were changes to the disciplinary, like the rule that I just talked about, the 3-day written reprimand or less that we got changed. There were some changes to the 180-day rule to where now the investigation can start on date of discovery as opposed from date of incident, but we still want to make some changes to that rule. I think one of the biggest things we were able to do was to completely remove the Office of Police Oversight structure out of the union contract, which was something that made no sense to us, right? Like, how can the department that has this oversight function control the pulleys and levers of how the oversight function works? It's like the literal definition of the fox guarding the hen house. So we were able to pull that out. It's a completely independent thing now. And I think another really important thing that we were able to get was anonymous complaints, because we know we live in a day and age to where people, they do have problems and concerns about police departments, but they don't want to bear their name. They don't want to give their identity because of the fear of retaliation. So we were able to get that as well. And that was something that the cops really didn't like, but they were able to swallow at the end of the day. And something that we got, subsequently, because it was not a huge talking point for us, was that the original contract that had no reforms, that had no changes in it, had a price tag of about $82.5 million. And then December 13, 2017, the police contract was voted down unanimously by the city council. And then when they came back with the changes that we wanted, city council also decided that we shouldn't be paying as much for police anymore. So the new price tag came down to about $44 million. And we were able to use some of that extra money on, housing and other services that the community needed. So, I'm glad we were able to really organize very hard and long around the police union contract and make some major gains, but it's still some work to be done. And hopefully we can start seeing this trend around the country as people are getting engaged in police contract negotiations and fighting.
Well, Chaz, that's an amazing amount of work and a challenge that you brought a whole community together around. And it sounds like everybody got to have their say in it, and that the result seems to be satisfying for everybody. That's an amazing story. And I'm sure that you're bringing all those talents to bear on the other issues that your coalition is working on to improve lives in Austin. And we're so very glad that you made the time to spend with us and talk with us about it. Again, everybody, this is Chaz Moore, the Executive Director, and you can find more information about Chaz and the work that they're doing at austinjustice.org. Thanks again for being with us. We really appreciate you, Chaz. Keep the good work up.
Thank you. I'll stick around for a few.
Great. That's awesome. Thank you. So I am moving through all of my information and trying to keep our train running on time, which is always a valuable thing to do. Our next panelist is our own 12th District Delegate, Chris Hurst. Chris just is joining us, not from Richmond, because I guess you don't get to go to Richmond much anymore with the pandemic. But he is still in the General Assembly session, and I want to have a chance to talk with you a little bit about that. For myself, I have to say we're very proud of the work that you do, Chris, and your constituent services to the citizens in this area is terrific, and the staff that you have helping you to do that is wonderful. And we appreciate your leadership. I particularly appreciate you being on here to talk about the legislative aspects of these issues of police union contracts. So thank you.
Well, happy to be with you, Victoria. And it's hard following Chaz and DeRay, and all of the incredible work that they're doing. More than happy, though, to talk about what we've tried to do in Virginia, and I think why this issue is now pressing for us to contemplate in Virginia because of some new legislation going into effect.
Yeah. So let's talk about that legislation just for a second, Chris, if we can. What do you think was the legislature's goal in passing the Public Employee Collective Bargaining Code section?
Well, for us in Virginia, we were one of only 2 states that didn't allow it in any form for any public employee. And so you talk about teacher union contracts and the ability to collectively bargain. That still, as of right now, it will take effect May 1st, but that hadn't been able to be done for firefighters, for police officers, for all of our public local employees. They had not had that right, and it was actually specifically prohibited by law until we had our regular session last year and a special session in the fall to not only enact the allowance for collective bargaining for local employees, but to also then we delayed it for a delayed enactment until May 1st, trying to be considerate of what's going on with the pandemic.
Right. So jumping back just a little bit, the Virginia legislature has made progress in criminal justice reform. And I'm wondering if you could just very briefly list some of the accomplishments that we've seen from this past session last summer and what's coming up this session that is going to help us in our efforts to reform criminal justice, especially around policing.
Yeah, we undertook a special session in the fall of 2020, both to respond to the pandemic, but then to also respond to what I believe were the public calls for us to address police brutality and criminal justice in Virginia. So we, with our 2 Democratic majorities in the House and Senate, were able to pass a lot of really great legislation. I think that we were a leader at the time. There have been other states that have followed with similar legislation, but in Virginia, we banned no-knock warrants. We banned chokeholds. We set up a system to require civilian review boards. We also looked at criminal justice efforts related to earned sentence credits and also more eligibility for early release and also trying to work on the court system, not just the police system. And so that brings us to where we are here in 2021, where we have legislation that's passed in both chambers, albeit with some distinct differences, a repeal of mandatory minimum sentences. And here, let me scroll down. We've done a lot of stuff. I have to kind of look at it. Probation reform to prevent technical violations from keeping people and throwing people back into jail, allowing evidence of mental illness to be introduced in non-insanity cases because so many people who are in the criminal justice system have an underlying mental illness, but you can't introduce that right now as a condition of what might have been a preamble to the alleged offense. Repealing the third strike rule in Virginia, and allowing for automatic expungement of certain criminal convictions for misdemeanors. So we've really tackled a whole heck of a lot, Victoria, here just in the last 4 to 5 months or so.
So one of the things, of course, about the collective bargaining legislation, which is great for workers in many ways, if it is so good for workers, why isn't it being required for state employees or private employers?
Well, so for private employers, I don't think it would be right for the Commonwealth to issue a mandate on that, to require, then essentially you would be requiring all employees to be collectively bargaining, and then essentially requiring all employees to be part of a union, statewide. I think that, when you talk about right to work laws, if you work in a shop that has a union, I think it makes sense that everybody should be in a union, so that you don't have people who are getting the benefit without paying any dues or contributing at all. I think for state employees, to be frank with you, it was going to be difficult to try and wrap our hands around a state budget that would have included what, from an actuarial standpoint, probably a lot of inflated costs, assuming that things like salary and fringe benefits would be collectively bargained and would essentially go up as a response.
Right. So basically, collective bargaining, a good thing for workers. But as we've heard all evening this evening, there are challenges for police union contracts and police union collective bargaining, and what it can mean in terms of reducing responsibility for any bad actions that law enforcement might take. Do you think there should be limits placed on the police union contracts? And if so, what would that look like, and how could that happen here in Virginia to avoid some of the problems that we heard about from all these other speakers who examined cases all over the country?
Yeah, I think that it's important to note a couple things. First is that we are going to allow collective bargaining for local employees, including police officers, starting May 1st. And prior to that, it had been prohibited. And so, we don't really have that collectively bargained contract issue before us in Virginia in the past. And so you can't really look at prior examples in Virginia for problems that you might want to try to rectify. The other thing is that we do have a Police Officer Procedural Guarantee Act that's in our state code, which does afford law enforcement officers certain minimum requirements and abilities as they're going through a disciplinary process. I think it's probably time for us to reevaluate the appropriateness of codifying something like that into state law, if we're also going to allow for police officers to unionize and then be able to collectively bargain. I think that when you look at the ability then for officers to do that, that based off of the comments, that have already been explained and might be familiar to other people who are watching this, who are interested in the issue, I think that we really do need to have a critical lens as we look at what should and should not be in some of these contracts, especially related to transparency, freedom of information, and discipline. I think that we want to make sure that the standard abilities for there to be a lack of justice and a lack of accountability are not baked into allowances and police contracts to continue that further.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that answer very much. What can the people who have listened to this program so far and who are going to hear more information about some of the issues around collective bargaining for law enforcement, what can they do to reach out to their legislators like you to see what can be done, what parameters might be able to be put on police union contracts? And can it be limited to wages and hours and benefits, as many union contracts are, working conditions, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think that we definitely want to look at this issue in a substantive way in Virginia. The way we would normally do something that is complex like this would be to refer it for study, whether it be the Crime Commission. With this, we have not set up yet a state labor relations board. That might be an avenue in the future to try and investigate and examine this. But what I think we really need to do is continue to, you and Dr. Reed kind of brought this to my attention, as did the dialogue on race writ large. And it was something that was not immediately on my radar, but now it is, because when you look into it, you definitely see that there's something here for us to be deliberate about and try and make a thoughtful decision as we move forward from a policy perspective. So I would encourage everybody to reach out to their local representative and maybe not go ahead and already start to demand some of these things, but just say, hey, are you even aware of this? Are you aware that this is upcoming and that this is something that you should be paying attention to? It's something that we've seen some increased conversation within the Democratic caucus in Virginia, and we definitely want that to continue. I think what would prevent a legislature from wanting to move forward with this would be any injection of doubt, because they have not been thinking about this for as long as they should have been. So, folks like the dialogue on race, really do a tremendous ability to inform legislators of issues that they need to know about. And so I would say that everybody in their own area needs to do the same.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that came up, and I'm just going to throw this last little question at you because I'm not remembering myself. They were talking about how easy it is for law enforcement officers to go from one job to the next without any repercussions, because their jackets get scrubbed and nobody knows about their prior problems, or maybe they got fired and then the union contract says, well, you can't tell anybody that they got fired. They just get to go on to their next job. Is Virginia looking at that, or has Virginia looked at that?
We have, and I believe that we are working on legislation that's still working its way through the House and Senate. But essentially, this idea of hopping from one jurisdiction to another without any of the information about why they were dismissed from the prior place being available, I think is a very big issue. And I think it's also it's a real public safety issue, because we've seen time and time again that some of the offenders of police brutality have worked at other departments and were dismissed for other behavior that could have been a known precursor. So we are addressing it in legislation. I'm not sure exactly where it is right now in the whole mess of the sausage making right now in Richmond. But it is something that is definitely part of an overall criminal justice package that we've been actively discussing in the legislature. That's
great. Chris, as with all of our panelists, it's so wonderful of you to take the time to chat with this group. We've had upwards of 140 people listening to this and learning more about the legislative process from you, and also about where we can go from here. And we really appreciate that. Anything else you wanted to say to the audience tonight?
No, I just appreciate the learning experience, and am here to learn more from Dr. Reed too.
Well, we're about to have him up next. Nice handoff there, Delegate Hurst. I appreciate that. So with that, then, of course, our next panelist is going to be Dr. Wornie Reed. He's our final panelist, and Dr. Reed is also the mover and shaker and organizer of everything we've seen tonight. He tried to give me credit, a little bit of credit at the beginning of the evening, but I will not accept it, because Dr. Reed, you have done a fabulous job with pulling this together, along with Margaret and Anna and Andy Morikawa and Lisa Garcia and our panelists Chaz and DeRay and Chris. the fact that you were able to pull us all together to make this happen has been really wonderful and educational. And so I'd like to welcome you back to the screen.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you're not going to get away with no questions, because I have questions for you too. I just have to figure out what I did with them. There they are.
Well, before you go to the questions,
Yes, sir.
I want to make sure that everyone listening knows that I didn't pull this all off by myself. There's a group of people called the Combating Racial Injustice Police Reform Committee that did this, and you tonight have, some people have seen them indirectly through what they've been doing in chat, and that's Anna and Margaret. But there are several others who were involved all the way, and we've been at this 5 or 6 months. Mm-hmm. And so I just want to make sure that is known. All
right. Well, thank you. And you're right. It takes a village every time, doesn't it?
Right.
So, you know, this has been dealt with by several of our speakers, but I just want to ask your personal opinion, Dr. Reed. Do you support unionization and collective bargaining?
Yes, I support unionization and collective bargaining. I used to be against having public employees unionized, but I was fighting against the tide. So I gave up and said, okay, they might as well too. So no, this is not against unions. This is against bastardized unions contracts that the police unions have across this country.
Well, some people argue that two things. This isn't a problem for Southwest Virginia because it would be so unusual to want to bring unions of any kind into a very traditional conservative area like Southwest Virginia. But also the nature of the legislation is such that it's not required. It's just an opportunity that a locality could have to allow collective bargaining for their public employees. So are we worried about something that's not really a problem?
Well, I guarantee you that it's a problem. In other words, in 90% of all union contracts in this country, there are problematic areas that limit the ability for us to have justice when police officers step over the line and have misconduct. Mm-hmm. Even if that misconduct is killing an unarmed person. The police union contract mitigates against dealing with that efficiently. And much of the union contract is there to protect police officers from that. So it's not just that we don't have this happening in Southwest Virginia. And we had a meeting today with the local police chiefs and sheriffs, and they assured me that nothing like that would have happened here. But I want to assure them that they're not the unions. And you heard earlier DeRay saying that in a lot of instances, the chiefs go along with this criticism of the contracts because the contracts are things negotiated around them. So while I don't expect it to come to Southwest Virginia soon, but I will bet it will get here one day. But it will come to Virginia before the end of this year if limitations are not put on what can be in the contracts.
What kind of limitations would you envision?
For example, the police have gotten a provision in Virginia. Another issue that we're concerned with that's related to these police union contracts are law enforcement bill of rights. In Virginia, it must be 5 days before you can deal with a police officer who is been accused of misconduct. You can't wait 5 days. If you, Victoria, have been accused of some felony or something, you will be addressed that day, as soon as you can get an attorney. And so we already have things that are kind of out of whack in Virginia already.
Mm-hmm.
And these police union contracts will be all over Northern and Eastern Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And they will spread to Southwestern Virginia
Mm-hmm.
if we're not careful. So we want to be careful enough to try to make sure that there are limitations such that it won't be easily done. It took the people in Austin 5 years or so. Was it 5? I guess 3 to 4 years to change the contracts.
Mm-hmm. So, as you see it, would there be a way for the groups that you're working with to take action to remedy this problem before it becomes a problem?
Well, the only way I see to remedy that is to have the legislature do it. So there are 2 ways to do that as I see it. First of all, we have to educate the legislators because, as Delegate Hirsch said earlier, a lot of people may not even be aware of this, okay? And so we have to make them aware. And then we have to make them specifically aware of what the issue is. Some people saying, well, it's not an issue for Southwest Virginia, so why we have to be bothered here? But if it happens in the state, it could affect any individual in the state.
Right. Right. I understand.
So what other groups can do in addition to the education is, I'm going to talk about that a little bit at the end here with my call to action.
All right. Well, very good. So, in listening to DeRay and Chaz talking about the issues that they had focused, that they had faced, you know, Chaz in particular worked with the police and with his city council on the Austin issue. It sounds like you've already got, through the dialogue on race, good relationships with our local law enforcement officers, and you alluded to that earlier in your discussion. How does that help us?
Oh, it would help tremendously. We have a very good relationship with the police chiefs in this area, with the police chief of Christiansburg, the police chief of Blacksburg, the sheriff of the county, also the police chief of Radford. And we have finally added this year the police chief at Virginia Tech. All of these people were in a meeting today in the dialogue on race.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the people that we would depend on to help us have things like police union contracts be more sensible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So you're not saying no police union contracts, no, they can't have a contract. You're just wanting, as DeRay and Chaz did, things that are reasonable and protect our citizens while protecting the officers and getting them the pay and the hours and the other union benefits, traditional union benefits that they're looking for.
Our group advocates that the police union contract should be limited to things revolving around working and working conditions and nothing else.
Well, I appreciate so much all the effort that you put into this, Dr. Reed. It's not just this, it has been a lifetime of work that you have done to combat racial injustice, to bring our community together here. And we appreciate that. But I understand that you actually have a specific call to action for our audience. And I'm wondering if you would share that.
Oh, yes. I have just 3 simple recommendations for our participants. That number one is please contact your legislators. So this is not coming out of the blue. This is what Delegate Hurst just said. Contact your legislators and make sure that they are educated on this issue. Now, we have provided information on how to contact your legislators on our website. Our website is combatingracialinjustice.org. And on there, you will see information about how to, say, send a letter or an email to your representative. But we also have the email address for your elected representative. So we're making it easy. Just go to their website and you will be guided to on how to contact your legislators. So also, to make sure you do that, we're not going to depend upon you doing it today. After today, we're going to email you. Each person registered, we're going to email you this information that I just mentioned, how to contact your legislator and your legislator's email address. Okay. So that's just number one. Number two is we're asking you to tell at least 3 individuals about this issue. Educate them as much as you are educated, and then get the following commitment from them that each one of those 3 people will pass it on just as you did. Mm-hmm. That's number 2. Number 3 is just something we do all the time, especially in the Combating Racial Injustice workshop. We will send you information periodically about this issue. Please don't throw it away. Please take it and decide what you might do about it, because this issue will not die tonight. It will just get worse tomorrow. Those are my 3 recommendations, and it's just not mine. It's from our whole group working on this.
Those are great marching orders, yes. And they are not only good action items, they are doable action items. They're not a hard and heavy lift.
No, they're not.
And that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, I'd like to just take a few moments to again thank our participants for being with us this evening. A reminder that if you didn't get your particular question answered, we will continue to look at the chat and try and get those answers for you, forward them if we need to. And so that's ongoing work for us. We also want to thank, obviously, Chaz and DeRay and Dr. Wornie and Delegate Hurst for taking the time to be with us. Really, really appreciate that. Hi, guys. Hi.
So we can answer questions now if you like.
All right, we've got everybody back on here, and if we've got some more questions in the chat, and everybody's got a little bit of time to do that, that would be great. So I do have a question from John Hess, actually. When changes are recommended to a contract, must these be voted on by all the members? And are they changed with a simple majority vote? And Chaz, I think that's going to go to you because you're the experienced one with police union contracts.
Well, I think it varies by state. Here in Texas and in Austin, it was all city council. So, I really need to explain, my role with working with the police, because it's the city and the union that negotiate the contract. And as the community, we were able to go to the meetings because they were public, but we couldn't talk. We were not given handouts about what they were talking about what was changing. So we were sitting in the room like a freshman in college with that professor that didn't care you were a freshman in college. And we were taking notes, typing fast, getting this information back out to the community to let them know what was going on. But yes, the decisions about what was in the contract had to be agreed upon. And then the city council would then vote on that. And I know in some municipalities, if the city council, like they did here, voted no, it would just go to arbitration. And luckily that didn't happen here, but it's normally, however the city council or city management structure is in that city, they are the ones that stamp the final approval on the contract.
So we've got some other very specific questions about union contracting. So I'm going to reach out to you again, Chaz. Can an existing police union contract be altered, or do you have to wait until the contract expires to change it?
So again, I think that also varies. But in Austin, if something wanted to change, like if the city wanted to change something or the union did, they have to give a 30-day notice. And then after that 30 days, they could go back into the bargaining agreement to change whatever they gave the notice about. But typically, you can't make like big drastic changes. But if you want to go in and tweak something, it's also depends on the contract, right? Like if the language says this contract is done until the next date, but in Austin we set it up to where they can go in and tweak if they need to.
So let's see, I think we have a question about what happens, and I guess this could be a question for Virginia as well as for Chaz or Dr. Reed, whoever knows the answer. But when someone is suspended with pay, if they're found guilty, do they have to pay back the pay? Or if their pay is withheld until there's a finding and they're found guilty, would then they not get paid? Or if they're found guilty, they're just still earning a buck, no matter what? Anybody got an answer to that one?
I mean, I think you would have to, I think you can look at some contract provisions or state law that would look at things like paid leave pending a disciplinary action after an investigation. Otherwise, I think it would be left up to whatever the union is able to negotiate with the local body.
Yeah, I would imagine that money is just gone. We had an incident here where an officer, an assistant chief rather, who was not part of the union, was accused of some racial slurs, and he got a tip, and he retired. He got his pension and everything. And after he retired, there was the city, nobody could go after him because he's no longer an employee. So I would assume it's the same way. You might lose your job, but I don't see how you'd be obligated to return any money.
Well, here's an interesting question. Has the constitutionality of union contracts for law enforcement officers been tested? I can only imagine that if there are that many contracts and people not liking them, that would have been tested somewhere in the country. But I'm guessing out of sheer, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and this is something that I have in my mind all the time, which is why I think we really need to have a critical lens on, like, if police unions can even really be a thing, right? Like, because if the police don't get their way in a police union contract, are they going to go on strike, right? Like, are they then not going to protect and serve? So, and I don't know the basis for Dr. Reed's hesitation with public employees not wanting to unionize, but I think that is part of it, right? Like, but also just like, I think it is a constitutional argument there, and I think now because people are paying attention to police union contracts that maybe it'll come up in a couple of years, but I mean, I think that's a valid point. It really doesn't make any sense to me how police can go around calling themselves police unions. It's an oxymoron to me. It doesn't make any sense to me on the academic side, on a political side. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But you know.
We did get a comment from one of our listeners that said that police union contracts have been upheld. And if that person could find us where that is, that'd be great. Or maybe I'll just do a little sleuthing myself and see if I can't come up with that answer. I'm retired, but I used to practice law. I might be able to still do the research.
I would guess that that's the fact of the union contracts have been upheld. But I doubt whether the conditions of the union contract is what has been upheld. I have some doubts about that, but I don't know for sure.
All right. And I have a question specifically for Delegate Hurst. The question is, what pressure do you think you will have from citizens afraid that these reforms will cause less effective policing and therefore less protection from criminals?
Well, it's a lot to unpack there, right? Because you're trying to ask some fundamental questions about whether law enforcement is really the primary preventer of, criminals being able to do harm to us or not. I would say that they are part of the process, but we prevent crime by making sure everybody has education, healthcare, a roof over their head. You're not born a criminal. You are led to, violate offenses because of circumstances that are going on in your life, for the vast majority of it. The question I think is a really good one, and one that we have been really wrestling with all the time since we've been doing criminal justice reform, which is how do we improve the system while not undermining, I think, the fundamental tenet of our society, which is that we want some people to be able to be called upon in an emergency and have them come to our aid or investigate a crime that was done against us. I have just really tried to be very frank with people that I don't think any of the legislation we've contemplated is going to undermine that basic part of our society. And I think that if we really want to look at issues of, retainment and recruiting for law enforcement, we need to continue to make it an environment that is going to endear itself for job applicants that actually are going to have longevity and the right desire to wear that badge. And we're not going to do that until we continue to reform the profession in a way that would engender those types of people to want to look into that as a career. Part of the reason why I do support pay increases for law enforcement, as we are having this simultaneous conversation, we have to have extreme accountability, but as we start to continue to work on this overall process legislatively and from a policy perspective, we need to look at it too from a workforce perspective, that fundamentally officers are workers, and we want to make sure that the best people are applying for those jobs to do that work.
Thank you.
And Ms. Victoria, I agree with you a lot. And I think, I think the most important thing is this, coming from a perspective of a community that looks at police in a myriad of ways, right? And I think it's fair to kind of back this part of the conversation up with James Foreman's book, Locking Up Our Own, where he talks about how a lot of black politicians and representatives supported the crime bill, right? The 1994 crime bill, because, we wanted to keep the good blacks safe from the super predators and the criminals, right? Mm-hmm. So in this concept of safety and what, I grew up, I'm blessed to be old enough to grow up watching Family Matters, right? Where Carl Winslow was, you know, he was the black neighborhood cop, and that's what I thought cops were. And I look at Philip Banks from Fresh Prince, who was a black judge, and you know, I'm thinking this is what the criminal legal system is, right? And I do think it's a place in society for something like that. And I think, and I may lose street cred for this, but I do think men and women join police departments wanting to be the heroes that comes with that profession, or at least the facade of it, right? But I think over time, due to a lot of what you said, Chris, like due to the lack of social services, due to the lack of people not having things, we create conditions where people do commit crime, where people are depressed or anxious and revert to other things that take them out of their natural order or way of being. So now our cops over time, instead of being heroes, instead of being the people that stop the really dangerous guys, they become social workers. They become mental health crisis experts. They become marriage counselors in some cases. And we need to find a way to, at the same time, pay these people for risking their lives to do the dangerous work that none of us want to do. But also, we have to find ways to fund these other things, right? We have to find another way to respond to mental health crisis, because we know when police show up, we do not get the outcomes that we as a society want. Even when it comes to some domestic situations, right? We need somebody that can fix this problem as opposed to breaking up a family structure. So it's just like, yes, let's compensate these people for being brave enough to do the things that we don't want to do, but also let's not inflate the police department's budget so much that we can't do these other things as well. And I think I agree with you. I think that's why we have to have this kind of paradoxical conversation around defunding the police, but also holding them accountable. Because anybody that thinks police departments are going anywhere for the foreseeable future, you're just not a realistic. and that's okay to imagine, because I imagine a world where we don't have police, which means every other function of society has to step up, from education to social services, all that, right? But until we get there, like we have to think outside the box and take some of that burden off policing, because they do absolutely too much. And I think over at least the last 20, 30 years, we see the results of what we call bad policing, but I think I call it policing fatigue, and people that are just doing too much. Their fuse is shorter, so the responses they get or the responses they give are shorter. As opposed to taking 30 minutes to tell somebody to calm down, I'm just going to take 30 seconds and shoot you. All right. And of course, some of that or a lot of it is draped in, white supremacy and racism. But I think the backdrop of it is that we put too much onus on the police departments. And now we're saying, you know what, let's reserve them for the very dangerous crimes. The things that I don't want any public group of crime defenders doing. That's what cops should be for. Mm-hmm. We have other ways and community solutions to respond to certain things in a community. I'm sorry for going on that tangent.
You know what? Thank you for that tangent. I think your words were helpful and thoughtful, and as Penny Franklin just wrote in the chat, you preach. But with that, I am afraid to say that we are, in fact, coming to the end of our time together this evening. And so I do want to thank you again for the amazing effort and time that you've put into this, the thoughtfulness of your responses, participants, the thoughtfulness of your questions. Thank you for those. And to our attendees, our volunteers, our tech team, everybody who worked so hard on this, thank you. A recording will be available, as they keep telling us on the chat. I just want to say, have a great night, everyone. Thanks for engaging with us. If you want to hang around, we will keep the Zoom open, and you can chat for a while, debrief, reflect. not a requirement. If you have places to go and dinner to eat or whatever, you don't have to stay. I will be signing off, although I might stay on the chat for a little bit. I'll just be turning off my video and my microphone. Again, Chaz Moore, Dr. Wornie Reed, Delegate Chris Hurst, DeRay McKesson. Thank you all so much and have a great evening. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.